Commonwealth has a reduced utilization in Commonwealth. Additional ideas that we have in this area, try to find a site for an additional school in the area, build a new school for community that's promised by developers, consider additions on elementary schools to increase capacity and then move 6th grade into elementary schools to relieve middle school utilization. And a lot of these are just ideas to eliminate the need for rezoning. Zone Creekstone at Riverstone to Austin Parkway and Zone Avalon at Riverstone to Sullivan. So another rezoning idea. Okay, moving on to option 2. What this option was is this was the option to consider a conversion and reuse of the administration annex. And it can be used as a standalone facility or serve as a special facility that supports one or more of the area elementary schools. For example, it could be a K-1 facility that supports Colony Meadows and Colony Bend as a 2-5. Feedback that we got on this, it's unequitable and unwise to spend tax dollars on facilities with temporary solutions. It just isn't a practical solution. Due to rezoning, kids will suffer and property value of Riverstone will go down, and it could incur asset loss and devaluation of property. And if this happens, the district will get less money in taxes. I'll only support this option if no rezoning is required as a result. That's another theme that we kind of have throughout. Other ideas that we have for this parking lot here is we have consider the annex as a standalone GT academy. This will likely reduce enrollment at Fort Settlement and eliminate the need for rezoning. Tear down the annex and construct a new school on the site. Okay, moving on to middle school option 1. This option was to construct an addition on First Colony and then rezone to balance enrollment between First Colony and Fort Settlement. Looking at the overall support here again, we've got almost 2,200 respondents that spent more than a minute on the survey, and there wasn't all that much support for this option. And then when we had all of the responses, there was more support for this option. So, some of the themes that we had here, not rezone students south of Texas 6 to schools north of Texas 6, like Quail Valley or Lake Olympia, and I think that's in response to a parking lot idea that we're seeing come through on the comments to the survey. Nowhere on the option did it talk about rezoning anybody to Quail Valley. That was only ever a parking lot idea. Other ideas, this is the best solution. It will resolve problems permanently. And then another kind of comment that we saw was last in, first out. And then also it seems like a good idea as long as it does not include the wholesale rezoning of Colony Meadows. And then we do not support any rezoning between First Colony and Fort Settlement. Other ideas that we had here, again, considering the annex as a standalone GT academy to reduce enrollment in the area. Consider an addition on Fort Settlement to accommodate Riverstone. And then we had our consider a standalone GT academy at Quail Valley to help move students from overutilized middle schools. Non-GT students at Quail Valley should feed into underutilized middle schools like Dulles or Lake Olympia. Another idea is Riverstone is too big to fit into any single middle school, and it's already used by other communities. Fort Bend ISD needs to build a new middle school for Riverstone residents, so there's no doubt about the urgency for this. Okay, moving on to Dulles. This first option for Dulles was to demolish and rebuild Meadows Elementary on its existing site, right size to the population. Overall, we had, the same number of people took the survey, spent more than a minute as all respondents, so everybody spent a good amount of time on the survey. 219 responses as of Thursday of last week, and there was overall support for this area. Most of the comments that we had in this area were related to the implementation of it. They like the idea of demolishing or swinging on site perhaps, so consider building a new school on the existing site on some of the green space, allowing the school to maintain its current location and identity while new construction is going on. That was kind of our overall comment there. Other options that we have in this area, consider rebuilding Meadows large enough to serve the Barrington Place students within the Dulles feeder pattern, and then utilize Barrington Place as a swing space for Meadows and other projects. Other ideas, consider creating Meadows as a magnet or converting it to a magnet-type school of natural sciences. It already has many programs in place, and there are many opportunities in Meadows Place. And then also consider making the replacement school a modernized open plan facility. And so, you know, a lot of people like the facility as it is now, but we just like to see the same kind of program, but in a new modern facility. Option 2 in this area was to vacate Meadows Elementary and accommodate the students in adjacent elementary schools, and either demolish the facility or use it for green space or some kind of non-educational use. Overall, there was not a lot of support for this option. You know, absolutely disagree with this proposal. Meadows Place is a city that cares passionately about its elementary school. And then other questions: how has Meadows been allowed to get to the current state of disrepair? And then, as far as additional ideas go, it really just refer to what we talked about on the previous slide. Moving on to Elkins. So, elementary option 1, consider rezoning between Lantern Lane and Quail Valley to balance enrollment. We had to do a lot of filtering in this one because the location of Settlers Way and Austin Parkway are actually in the Clemens feeder pattern, and there's a lot of talk about Sullivan and Riverstone in that area, which are in the Elkins feeder pattern, and so we kind of had to go through this and make sure that we got the comments that were relevant to you know, the schools that we're talking about with the feeder pattern. We don't want any rezoning for elementary schools of Riverstone students keeping in the current feeder pattern. Would really appreciate status quo. Riverstone students have already been moved around, and so I think what that's referring to is considering the projected utilization of Austin Parkway and Settlers Way, knowing that they might have additions on them at some point, which could, in the future, possibly help relieving Sullivan Elementary. So overall, we did not have a lot of support for this option, and I believe that it is because of that rezoning aspect of this. We didn't get a whole lot of feedback relative to the Lantern Lane and Quail Valley enrollment. It was all related to mostly Sullivan and Austin Parkway and Settlers Way. And also, you know, other ideas, partner with charter schools to reduce overutilization. Another idea that kind of came out, one of the reasons for putting an addition or new schools in this area was because of the projected growth from the Lake Olympia corridor or Fort Bend Toll Road corridor. One of the ideas that we got that was kind of out of the box was, hey, what if we convert Lake Olympia Middle School to an elementary school facility to address that potential growth, and then build a new middle school in the high tower feeder pattern. And so that was kind of another idea that came out of this area. Moving on to option 2, this was building an addition on the Palmer to address that growth. And then also consider balancing enrollment through Lantern Lane and Quail Valley. And again, we started to get a lot of feedback that were kind of relative to Riverstone in that area. I do not support any rezoning of Sullivan Elementary School. Copy and paste content below for question 6. And so it starts to get a little evident that there was some organized Facebook or social media effort to put that information on the survey. I support filling up underutilized schools to balance enrollment, reducing operational costs, and saving taxpayer dollars. And again, not a whole lot of support for this option, but it's mostly driven by anything that touches Riverstone or Ann Sullivan Elementary. Other ideas in this area, again, partnering with charter schools, kind of the same as we had before. Consider that Lake Olympia Middle School site as a new elementary facility or a converted elementary facility to address that growth. And then building a new middle school in the high tower feeder pattern. Okay, moving on to the middle school option in this area. This option was simply expanding the GTE program at Quail Valley to draw a district and just enrollment away from other underutilized middle schools or overutilized middle schools. And again, we did not have a lot of support for this option. Looking at these diagrams here, we had over close to 2,000 responses for both, so not a whole lot of artificial inflation in these numbers. As far as feedback goes, a lot of this was just related to the parking lot idea of moving anybody south of 6 into Quail Valley Middle School. We did get some feedback that we do not like, smart kids and regular kids divided. They should socialize with each other instead of being isolated from one another. And then, of course, we got, why don't you just rezone, put in Riverstone students to Quail Valley? These are good students. They don't need GT program. They can boost the Quail Valley score, and we don't need money to expand facilities. Other ideas in this area, again, this is kind of echoed from before. Consider moving the GT Academy at Quail Valley to another middle school. We've done the balance enrollment between Fort Settlement versus Colony and Quail Valley, and see the common feeder pattern. Another idea here, make Quail Valley a standalone GT Academy to relieve overutilization of the other middle schools. As opposed to the current school within a school concept. Close Lake Olympia Middle School, transfer all students to Quail Valley. Move the eastern portion of Riverstone to Lake Olympia. And again, we have our use the annex as a GT Academy, freeing up space at Quail Valley for rezoning. And then we also have the idea of creating a GT program at every middle school. Okay, moving on to Hightower. Our option in this area was to construct a new elementary school to relieve parks in the Lake Olympia Parkway, Fort Bend Toll Road corridor. And this is kind of also related to that option that we had in the previous slide with Palmer. Overall, kind of mixed support for this. There wasn't a whole lot of response in this area, about 130 responses across the board. Looking at the comments, I teach at parks. I've seen the growth in the neighborhood as well as the tollway area. It's only right to have a school in place to avoid overcrowding. Additional ideas, again, consider converting Lake Olympia Middle School into an elementary facility. We do have a lot of repeats kind of through this, but a lot of these kind of cross feeder patterns, and that's important to illustrate these ideas because some people might just pick up the support and only look at one feeder pattern. Rezone students from Parks and Goodman to Burton. Use the excess capacity Hightower to serve 7th and 8th graders. So that might fix the issue of not having a middle school at Hightower. And then, of course, build a middle school feeder in the area is another idea. Okay, moving on to Kempner. Our first option in this area is to close and repurpose Sugar Mill Elementary for district use, perform a full modernization of Lakeview. Consider rezoning process to align the Lakeview students that reside on the Austin feeder pattern with the Austin feeder pattern schools. And then consider serving the Barrington Place students within the Kempner feeder pattern in either Lakeview or Town West. And then have our life cycle projects on our other facilities. We had about 500 responses kind of across the board from this one. There were, overall, there wasn't a lot of support for this option. Comments that we got in this area: modernizing Lakeview is not cost effective when comparing to the renovation cost of Sugar Mill. Cannot close any elementary schools. We're still building elementary schools in the district, which shows that we have a need for seats. Rezone if needed to populate existing facilities. Other additional parking lot ideas that we have here: consider Lakeview as an early childhood site. Consider renovating both Lakeview and Sugar Mill, keeping both the schools open, maybe a TK2 or a 3-5 concept. If Sugar Mill or Lakeview consolidates, use the remaining schools as swing space for Meadows while it's rebuilt. Expand the community use of the auditorium renovation and repurpose the Lakeview facility for complementary community use, and Sugar Mill will remain as an elementary school. Moving on to the next option, option 2. This is to close and repurpose Lakeview, perform a major renovation at Sugar Mill, and then consider that same rezoning process to align those Lakeview students with any Austin feeder patterns in the schools. And then also consider accommodating the Barrington Place students in the Kempner feeder pattern in either Sugar Mill or Town West. Overall, we had a majority support for this option, over 60%, and again about those same 500 responses in this area. Some of our comments that we had: Lakeview is not in the heart of a neighborhood, and Sugar Mill is. I believe renovating Sugar Mill would be more cost effective to the district since it's a much newer facility than Lakeview. Other ideas, parking lot ideas that we have here: again, consider Lakeview as an early childhood center. Another idea that we had, and this is only in here because I believe that MR Wood is in the Kempner feeder pattern, was in the rebuild of Meadows, consider MR Wood as a place to house students during rebuild, and then consider making Lakeview a FDISD Kids Hall of Fame. And so, lots of ideas for how to address that Lakeview facility that's no longer going to have a school presence on it. Moving on to the next area, this is Marshall feeder pattern. So our first option in this is around elementary schools. So close and repurpose Hunter's Glen for district use. Perform life cycle replacements on the other schools. Overall, kind of mixed results on this one. We didn't have a whole lot of feedback, about 300 respondents overall. Some of our comments: I know the facilities are underused, but having taught in this area for 29 years, I feel it's very necessary to lower class size and have smaller classes. I understand that the area feeding the Marshall struggles with enrollment, but I believe that implementing a system that calls for rezoning and redefining a boundary to effectively feed those students into middle schools and high schools should be considered before closing Hunter's Glen. For example, consider having Quail Run students go to Hunter's Glen for elementary. Other ideas that we have in this area, close Glover, utilize the space for administrative purposes. Also, tackle elementary issues with literacy and advocacy programs that monitor students and track success from elementary all the way to high school. Other ideas, create a special program at Hunter's Glen, like fine arts, ELL, or maybe Montessori. One thing I did want to talk about is that we did have a lot of feedback at Marshall, specifically about Marshall High School, and we put that feedback in those overall high school options areas, and so you're not going to really see that in this because this mostly focuses on the elementary option. Okay, moving on to Ridge Point. Our elementary option 1, build 2 new elementary schools, one on the Texas 6 corridor and one on the Sienna Parkway 521 corridor. This was interesting. There was a lot of, we had 573 respondents that spent more than a minute on the survey, and overall about 850 respondents. Some of the feedback that we got here, how many times do these children need to be rezoned? There's been a lot of rezoning in this area. My child lost her closest friend in first grade. We need elementaries to keep up with the growth in the neighborhood. I would support this if and only if the schools supported Sienna residents. Our tax dollars should be going to the schools and students who are paying the taxes, not neighborhoods that are being bussed in. Homes not paying taxes to Sienna should be zoned to schools. It should not be zoned to schools in Sienna. Additional ideas in this area. This was interesting to me. Consider changing grade configurations throughout the feeder pattern to deal with utilization. Maybe look at K4, 5, 6, and 7, 8. Instead of building 2 elementary schools, build 1 5th and 6th grade campus to help with overcrowding. Another idea that kind of came out that we'll talk about more in the next option is consider going K4 in the elementary schools, 5, 6 at Bain, 7, 8 at Thornton, build a new 9th grade center, and then 10, 12 at Ridge Point. This option may not need the 2 new elementary schools, and if we do this, the 9th grade center is less expensive than 2 new elementary schools. Moving on to the next option, middle school and high school. This is the option 1, which is the grade configuration change. This would change Baines to a 6-7, Thornton to an 8-9, and Ridge Point to a 10-12. Overall, with the respondents that spent more than a minute on this, majority of the people kind of were unsure, but we had about a third of the support and about 25% opposed. When we look at all responses, including those that spent less than a minute on the survey, we have a majority, over 50%, that support this idea, this option rather. Some of the feedback that we got here, absolutely, absolutely do not support this option. 2 middle schools were built to accommodate the overcrowding of Baines. The 9th grade center will just need to be built to accommodate overcrowding Ridge Point. I find it better than being rezoned to Hightower. Additional ideas in this area. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong slide.
You are on. Thank you.
Additional ideas in this area. Again, that idea of the K4 at the elementary schools, 5th and 6th grade at Baines, 7th and 8th grade at Thornton, a new 9th grade center. The idea that this could reduce the utilization of the elementary schools by shifting 5th grade out, and that the 9th grade center would be less expensive than 2 elementary schools. Other ideas, this is a short-term plan. Long-term plans to be made to build another high school in Sienna. And just to look at this, I was looking at the wrong chart again. So support for this option. Overall, we've got a lot of support with the responses that spent more than a minute on it. And then we had less support for those when we consider all of the responses. And so we had a lot of responses that were less than a minute that came in not supporting this. Okay, moving on to option 2 for the middle schools and high schools. This is to construct a 9th grade center for 1,000 students for Lee Ridge Point High Schools. Ridge Point High School. I love the idea of the 6th, 7th, and 8th, and 9th grade building, but I strongly believe that 9th and 12th grades should be separated. Again, how does this impact, what would the program look like for 9th grade, sports, band, choir, et cetera? Again, other ideas, the K, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, 10, 12 idea. We all know that 1,000 students isn't going to be enough, so if you're going to build another campus, just make it 2,500 and have it be a 910, but at that point it's really a second high school. Consider making the new building a 12th grade center instead of 9th grade center. And then other ideas, consider open enrollment between Ridge Point and the High Tower, where parents can choose between both campuses. Maybe some parents in Siena won't mind sending their students to High Tower. Also offer special programs at High Tower and incentive for parents to send their students there. Okay, moving on to Travis. Our option here, build a campus addition on Neal. The core was originally designed for 1,000 students, and so just put the addition on that facility to get the overall capacity up to 1,000 students. Overall, we had just under 200 responses in this area. Did not have a whole lot of support for this area, but this was mostly related to anything that would really touch the boundaries or take anybody out of Madden. So if capacity is needed, build it, but don't build over there and shut down schools elsewhere in the district. Use the capacity that we have first. Shouldn't move the least expensive houses to another elementary school. Should be by which part of the neighborhood is closest based on proximity. Again, a lot of this is related to Madden. We did start to get some parking lot ideas around the feeder pattern split that we currently have in Madden. Madden currently feeds 100% into Garcia, and then it splits between Travis and Austin. And so, kind of what we got in this area, if Madden is going to feed to Travis, then it needs to go to Bowie and not Garcia. Other ideas, put a 2-story addition on the Madden. And again, consider building 51 large enough to accommodate all of Aliana within Madden. Consider rezoning all non-Aliana residents out of Madden. Okay, moving on to Willow Ridge. So option 1, major renovations at Ridgemont to create a TK1 building, focusing on early literacy, and then build a new 1,200 student 2-5 building on the Shadow Creek Ranch site. There wasn't a whole lot of support for this option. I mean, there was some, but more opposition than support. Comments that we have in the area, the new facility will be too far from the neighborhoods that Ridgemont, Ridgegate, and Blue Ridge and Briargate serve. Too many schools to close. We may need those seats. Other ideas that we had in this area, rebuild Blue Ridge and open it to the community. Create a dedicated school or a school within a school to house special education programs in the underutilized Blue Ridge. Just ideas to better utilize those facilities. Moving on to option 2. So this was renovations at Briargate, Ridgegate, and Ridgemont, and then close and repurpose Blue Ridge. More support for this than the previous option, but we only had 42 respondents fill this out. Comments that we have, I'm a teacher at Blue Ridge, where would I go? Is my job insured? These schools are actually in our communities, fix them rather than spending money on a new one in Shadow Creek. Other options that we have here, other ideas rather, moderate renovations at all 4 campuses. Also, just consider new construction instead of renovations. The idea kind of here was if you're gonna replace Meadows and Blue and Lakeview, then maybe consider this area as well. Okay, our last slide we have here, we did have a chance to give kind of an abridged presentation to the Student Voices Group, which is a group of 33 high school students that represent three representatives from each high school. And we gave them a chance to kind of go through and discuss everything and kind of give their parking lot ideas. And so I'm just going to kind of quickly go through this. What was surprising to me about their feedback is that they use the word rezoning a lot. Everybody was has been pretty opposed to any rezoning, but when we talked to the students, I would say almost the majority of these options these ideas talk about rezoning. They talked about the idea of rezoning new territories to Austin, and this is something that we kind of saw throughout the survey, trying to help out with that Tarsha split currently. Satarsha splits 3 ways. Brazos Bend goes to Travis, Walker Station goes to Austin, and Cornerstone goes to Clemens. And so the idea of trying to get all of New Territory into Austin was something that they came up with, that they mentioned. Also rezoning a portion of Elkins to Marshall, then rezoning part of Ridge Point to Elkins. Make Marshall Early College High School, move Willow Ridge kids to High Power, zone neighborhood split kids around Ridge Point to Marshall. Tear down and repurpose Lakeview, renovate Sugar Mill, and adjust Lakeview's feeder pattern. Build a middle school for High Power, in which it's solely zoned there. The neighborhoods close to Elkins that are zoned to Ridge Point should be rezoned. Try to make Willow Ridge and Marshall 6A. And then also make a GT high school or early college prep high school. They didn't like the idea of making an accurate center or splitting grades. And so, again, this is just a kind of overall, this is the feedback that we got from those student groups. And so with that kind of concludes my presentation. Beth, did you want to add anything else?
I think you've covered the main themes. Thank you, Scott.
All right, thank you, Scott, and thank you, Beth. We appreciate all your work on all of this, for attending all the community meetings, for making that presentation, not just 4 times, but 5, because twice at Elkins, right? So that's 5 times. And for taking all those questions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open it up for either questions or board comment or discussion. We can go feeder pattern by feeder pattern, or you guys can just comment on the things that stand out to you and the issues that you want to talk about. We'll start with Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. That was clear as mud. Actually, I'm joking. It was a very good presentation. But obviously, it's a very difficult concept here that we're trying to piece together, having done it 4 years ago. So, my first question is, can you identify where that IP address is coming from? Because, I mean, I can tell from where the comments were. Do we know? We can kind of do a search on the IP addresses and do like a geolocation, but the 3 IP addresses that accounted for probably 4,000 responses, 2 of them were right in and around Fort Settlement, and 1 was actually around Baylor. And so I don't know if it was someone writing a script, running it at home overnight, and then running it again at work the next day, or what it was. But those are the areas that they were in, and it's not surprising since most of those respondents were focused purely on the Clemens, Commonwealth, and Fort Settlement areas. Right. Right. So yeah, you can kind of tell where those came from, but it's disappointing that somebody would do that. You know, I understand this is a very emotional subject. That's the hard part about being up here. You're dealing with 2 things. You're dealing with people's kids and their taxes. But to do something like that, you're almost invalidating a lot of serious concerns that people put actual time into answering some of these questions. And so it just makes extra work trying to figure out which ones of these responses are real and which are just generated by a script. And so I would say shame on people for doing that. And I do appreciate many of the other ones where you look, where you see that people actually took the time to, you know, give constructive criticism or constructive arguments, options, proposals, and we appreciate that. That was very obvious in many of these areas. So I have some other questions though, and I'm actually not going to try to talk about specific feeder patterns, because just like I said last week, you know, it's just going to set off the rumor mill, and then we'll see, you know, even more colored shirts. So, how much land is actually available in Riverstone or in Siena? because, you know, many of the comments talk about, well, just build a school, just build a school. Because I'm pretty sure there's kind of like none. Is that correct? For those of us who have looked at that?
I don't have the map in front of me, but PASA did have there is a page in the PASA study that shows all available land for sale over 5 acres. And there was not anything in Riverstone in that area. There is some land available within the Ridge Point Cedar Path.
Okay. And then the other thing that we have to consider, so I'd like to ask others to consider, how much did we spend on Thornton Middle School, Oscar or Steve? Do you have that? Approximate, not, you know, we don't need an exact number.
It's in the 30 million range.
Okay. And I remember the last time we built the high school at Ridge Point, it was in about 90 million, something like that. No, it was up there.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, so, you know, these are things that we all have to consider, obviously, because, you know, that's gonna really ratchet up the cost of a future bond. So, you know, when you know, we get suggestions, we'll just build, it's not that easy. And one, it takes more than, you know, a few months to get that done anyway. So, let's see, the other question I had, if you go to page 9,
Okay.
You see the disparity in the support versus non-support between the, what I will call valid responses versus the invalid responses, which are almost, well, let's see, about 1,500, 1,600 votes there. What do you think caused that? What do you think the main objection was there? Or I should say, what caused the sudden support when, you know, you had IP addresses coming from the Fort Settlement area?
I think that when I look at this, and you know, this is opposition against anything Quail Valley over here, and then I think the support for this is just you know, perhaps a group that just wants to keep that area around Fort Settlement the same.
Okay.
So the idea was that in this option, we would only be balancing enrollment between First Colony and Fort Settlement.
So maybe the fear was that if we add an addition to First Colony, which I don't think is needed anyway based on the decreasing enrollment, that there'd be people forced to move out of Fort Settlement. Probably.
I think that's the idea.
Okay, yeah. All right. And then some of the other questions about Madden, and this would be for Oscar, are, you know, is it even possible to add on to that school?
Yes, sir, it is possible. The location where the portables are presently located, you could put a 2-story addition there. The portables would have to go into the playground while that's happening, and then it would take some of the play area, because obviously the 2-story addition would be a little wider than the portables that we have there. But it is possible.
Okay, and I guess the same, you'd have to ask the same question about Commonwealth. Is that actually possible to do that? I mean, being a much older school, could you do that? Is there area? Is there room?
Well, sir, it is possible. You don't always have to look at just adding on. You could do some demolition and then some addition to gain additional space. So, I mean, the answer would be yes. Would it be easy? No.
Okay. Okay. I have some more, but I'll yield for now.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Ms. Hellinger.
Thank you, Scott, for your presentation. You know, I've been reading through all the documents, and I've got this as nighttime reading every night. tonight, and I've got so many questions and learning some of the communities and whatnot. But I want to say a couple of general statements around some of the concerns that I've had with some of the comments and direction to the facilities committee is that when considering our options, we should not be putting the haves versus the have-nots against each other, number one. I found some of the comments and the undertones of some of these statements were, I'll just be honest, a bit racist and a bit elitist. Our job is to serve all of our students in Fort Bend ISD, not just certain neighborhoods. And it's important for us to consider that when making these types of decisions. Unfortunately, I wasn't part of the first, 2014, 2015, but I remember being there and being in the meetings. There is a lot of things for us to consider with this particular process. Now, when I look at high schools, I'll start with high schools. When I look at high schools, I would like to see us utilize the high schools. I think someone said that, let me take my notes here. Someone made a statement that high schools are the center of our community and makes them thrive, and I believe that. And so I was sitting here thinking, and I mean, pondering all over, for the last couple weeks or so, just, trying to see both sides and different sides of this coin, because this is different, this coin has more than just a heads and a tail. It's got the sides as well. Do we not want programs that support our kids no matter what school they're in? Or does it have to be just in my neighborhood? And I want to challenge us and challenge the community in the thought process. Because if I had an opportunity to send my kid at maybe, let's see, a international program of some sort, would I want my child to go to that school? Or does it have to be in my neighborhood if I have a specialty program? So I'm just not in favor of us closing down high schools. I want us to figure out how to utilize those high schools and put programs into those high schools. That's my position right now around that. There was a question around what happened to those schools, like Meadows Elementary, and I had to do some research to figure out. And I listened to Scott's presentation, I listened to Dr. Dupree's presentation, that I talked to people who were on the committee the last time, try to get an understanding of how did we get here, right? And last week we had a conversation around budget. We're going to be voting on later on. There was a $1 billion proposal to do all those fixing of different schools and putting new construction and whatnot, but it didn't pass. It was cut in half. And so when I heard that put a lot of things into perspective for me. It's not just that we or the board at the time just wanted to neglect, certain schools, but the community has to support the bonds. If you want all this work done, you got to support all the dollars. And we spend taxes not just for our community. Our taxes go all to Fort Bend County. And when I look at some of these comments, it really disturbs me. Some of them I appreciate the well thought out comments. I think Dave shared that with us. But we have to do what's best for Fort Bend ISD, not just my neighborhood. Now, what does that mean? there's a lot of things to consider with the different schools that are already there. The ability to walk, I think someone said the children to walk to school, the highways that are there, you know, the safety risks that they do put on our kids if they're walking and driving or riding bikes, you know, the cost of busing our kids to certain types of schools. This is not an easy task. But I wanted to make sure I said that I'm not for just, oh, my kid can't go to that school because it's on that side or not. We've got to really do what's best for our kids to have the best education they possibly can in this wonderful Fort Bend ISD district. And we're going to be mailing on this a little bit longer. And I have tons of other comments, but I think I'm going to get off my little soapbox for a little bit and look forward to hearing more about the options. And I do read all the emails that come in because it gives me perspective and understanding. So.
Thank you, Ms. Helliger. Mr. George.
Thank you, Madam President. And I just wanted to simply make, I'm not going to get into the details of it, specifics, but I remember, you know, one of the reasons I got on this board was, as a parent, I didn't like when, Ms. Tassan mentioned in the past, we did, you know, rezoning without, as a parent, my knowledge. And we got a postcard saying that, you know, oh, this is where your kid is going to be zoned next year. And I hated it, and I'm sure we all do. So I'm glad we are having this conversation. I'm so glad. I know that every one of us here, you know, agree with that, and so it is hard. A couple of things I just wanted to mention here. I see a number of recommendations recommending building larger elementary schools. We are planning a number 51 right now. Maybe this question goes to Oscar. Do you know what capacity we are looking to build that?
Yes, sir, it is 850 with 1,000 core. And also, if I may, I want to go ahead and just clarify. I said 30 million, but Thornton Middle School is actually 58 million.
Okay.
I checked online.
Okay. And is that fair to say that building a high school is close to 100 million right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And also another question, probably I have, do we consider, or we are thinking about having spaces available based on our need? We could add addition to the building, you know, new design and stuff, so when you don't need it, maybe we could remove it, things of that nature. Have you ever looked into that kind of stuff? I hope you understand what I'm saying.
Each elementary that we're designing right now has a designated area for an addition, and then also we have a designated area for portables.
Okay, okay, so we are looking at that. And another question maybe about these generated surveys. And I think we need to decide how we are going to treat that, because I don't know, it is added as 2,000 or 3,000 surveys, right? Is that right? But
Could you repeat?
I'm talking about generated, you know, like computer generated surveys. So how we are going to treat that, because that's not the real reflection of the community or a real reflection of what we intend to do. And already Mr. Rosendahl mentioned about it, and which is honestly, that's not the purpose of this process. So how we are going to, is there any thought about it?
I understand. One of the ways that Scott's been able to present that information, and we'll be sharing it with the steering committee, is being able to isolate so that you can see those that were generated very quickly and go toward those IP addresses that we saw multiple responses coming from. So we'll be able to talk through that with the steering committee. Scott, do you want to add anything to that?
No, you got it. We have all the data that we can sort and filter by IP address. can see all the results on the fly or even use the duration like we have before.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to conclude saying that, I appreciate everybody being here, and, I really like this process, and I know it's not comfortable, it's not a pleasant conversation, but I'm very excited to see that we are having this conversation so that we could move forward as one Fort Bend ISD. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. George. Mr. Rice.
I would like to begin by agreeing with Ms. Haliger, and I think that everybody here would agree that to the extent possible, we want every single elementary school child to be able to walk or ride their bicycle to school. Middle school, the orbit gets a little bit wider, and high school, wider still. And to the extent possible, I don't think any of us want to close any schools. Some people may say, well, how did we get here? And so I'm going to give you a brief history lesson, because my wife and I moved here in 1981. Some people have been here before then. And back then, Fort Bend ISD was in the county. The county had 289,000 people in it when we first moved here in 1981. And today it has over 720,000 people. And it's going to hit 1 million. And so on the one hand, we talk about, oh, we're really excited to live in Fort Bend County. It's one of the fastest growing counties in the United States of America. But with that growth comes a lot of challenge. And that challenge is to keep up with some neighborhoods which are aging in place. That means that the children have grown up and the parents haven't moved, and it might take 40 years to regenerate a school, regenerate the student population in a school. It takes about 40 years, maybe 45. Nevertheless, we are doing all of this for a purpose, and that is leading up to a bond, which I believe the administration may ask us to, the board, to vote on in November, or we would probably have to vote in August in order to have an election in November. And this might be the last chance that we have to pass a bond for probably another 2 years, because the governor is proposing for a bond to pass. 30% of all the registered voters within the political subdivision must vote. And then in order to pass a bond, a super 2/3 majority have to approve it. And we don't see voter turnout like that, except in a presidential election. So were that to occur, and we don't have a bond election this year, we'll have to wait 2 more years for the next presidential election. And if it were to continue, we could only pass a bond every 4 years. So that is the challenge that we have. We bought the land for Ann Sullivan in 2012. It was $2.50 a square foot. And back in the day, we were getting land for less than $1 a square foot. But that has changed, and there's less land. And today we're paying $3.50 a square foot, if you can find it. We'll get to a point where the only option available to us would be the use of eminent domain, which nobody really wants to do because it's very difficult. So the other thing that I would like to say is that as we get to a point where our schools, Meadows Elementary School being one of them, 45 years of age, that's pretty old. And school districts are constrained in their maintenance and operating budget. 86% of our budget goes to teacher salaries and benefits, employee salaries and benefits. And Some are proposing that we have a cap of 2.5% on all property tax revenue. The bulk of our budget comes from everybody in Fort Bend ISD. When I got on the board in 2010, 52% of our revenue came from local property taxes and 48% came from the state. And today it's almost 70% from y'all and me and everybody here, and 30% from the state. That's because the state supplants our tax revenue so that they don't have to spend money out of their own pocket to fund programs. That puts, and since our core business is to teach kids, we have to maintain buildings, but our core business is to teach kids. There's a teacher shortage. We have to pay salaries and benefits that are commensurate with the going rate, or we're going to lose teachers. And so sometimes that makes it very difficult for us to do all the maintenance that we really want to do. And so when a school gets to be 45 years of age, we're really better off, in my view, of replacing it with a new school based on new standards and everything else. If you look back in time, you'll see how the evolution of school design philosophy has changed from schools that were 60 years ago. They might have started out at 40,000 square feet, and they have gotten bigger over time because there are economies of scale. In Sullivan, for example, has 1,200 students in it. That's a huge elementary school. It's really 2 schools in one. But all it takes is money. All it takes is money. So I will tell you that the board, well, I'll speak for myself, but I know that everybody on the board still believes that it's important for us to have neighborhood schools, because the schools do represent the hopes and dreams of every parent everywhere for their child to get a good education and have a good life. And we support that too. So next time we meet, and I hope that you come again, as Mrs. Tasson said, we usually don't have this much company, but I'm glad you're here. And so next time we'll have School Finance 101 for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Burdine.
Thank you, Mrs. Tasson. I'd also like to thank all of you for being here this evening and taking time out of your daily schedule to attend. We appreciate all of your feedback. I wanted to first start off by thanking our administration and Scott. I feel like that we were put in a position that was easy to explain from a board's perspective. I mean, we empowered the community. As Mrs. Tasson said, we didn't have to do this, but I feel good that we did it because we empowered our community. I'll also echo what Mr. Rosenthal said. I'm also a little disappointed that some people took advantage of that power that we gave the community. And I know that we'll be able to overcome that. I'm speaking for myself, but I would assume someone would agree with me on this, but we are looking for long-term solutions, obviously on a limited budget. And it makes it tough, but once again, we're in the business of educating children, and I feel that we will do everything in our power to make sure that we will do the best job that we can. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. Mrs. James.
Thank you, Mrs. Tasson, and I guess I would say thank you to Mrs. Martinez and Mr. Leopold for their tremendous amount of work, and for all the E-team who was involved in all those community meetings. I saw you guys out there many times. I guess the other, I want to echo many of the things that my colleagues have said. I agree with. We're working on a long-term plan to address long-term needs, things that are appropriate to finance over a long period of time. And I know that we want to be mindful of populations as they change and grow as we're making these plans. And so I want to echo a particular thing that Mr. Rice said. He talked about neighborhoods, neighborhoods regenerating and turning over, and I think that's a thing that we need to consider and plan for. So I think I too would say I'm not in favor of closing elementary schools, because we need to be planning for the future and not cutting off our nose to spite our face, I guess would be a way to phrase that. And I think also if we have elementary schools, and this is echoing something you said, Ms. Hollinger, if we have elementary schools, and I'm thinking elementary in particular, but if we have declining populations, then we need to look at why that's happening. And is there something that we're not doing? Is there strengthening of academic programs? Is there resources that we're not providing that's causing those neighborhoods to not turn over the same way that other neighborhoods might? So I guess that would be one of my comments. And I believe, Mrs. Martinez, we have a policy that speaks to the concept of neighborhood schools and choices that we make around that. And I'm assuming that that policy is going to be part of the conversation when the steering committee is discussing the plans, right?
Yes, ma'am, that is accurate. Policy FC local guides school attendance areas, and should part of the recommendation or any of the recommendations lead to any boundary discussion or redrawing of boundaries, that would be a different and standalone process involving community engagement and guided by FC local.
Okay, so that's a really good point, because as we said, we're looking at long-term plans, and some of those might mean attendance boundary changes 2, 3, 5 years out, and I know when we did this last time, we tried to anticipate what that might look like in kind of a long-term flow, and I assume that same thing will happen this time.
That is accurate.
Okay, and so then with regard to that, I do want to comment that I think Mr. Leopold maybe read this, and I've experienced it myself, that some of these neighborhoods that have experienced multiple rezonings, I would ask for the committee to be mindful of that situation. That's not an ideal situation for kids to go to multiple elementary schools in their short elementary career. So to me, that's a priority. And then there was a comment I want to get an interpretation on page 4. I think it's on page 4, at least that's the page number I wrote down. There was a comment about keeping academies in the status quo, or keep academies status quo. How do you guys interpret that? What does that mean to you?
I interpret that as keeping them distributed the way that they're currently distributed and not consolidated.
Okay, so not consolidate, but we still understand that academies and programs are portable from school to school, and that's in board policy.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to think about that clarification. And thank you, Mr. Rosenthal, for asking about the costs of the schools, because I think that's an important piece of information for us. So thank you, that concludes my comments.
Thank you, Mrs. James. I'm going to wrap up by being a little more specific, because I want to ask particularly our steering committee members to think about a few things that I've been thinking about. And I think it's important for you guys to hear it. It doesn't mean that I'm for or against it, but these are the things I'm thinking about. Before I do that, my first question for you, Scott, is if in the Ridge Point feeder pattern, if we split the middle schools between 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, how much time does that buy us before we are back here doing this again?
I think it's 5 years. And that's given that we have to do some work on Thornton to reprogram it to increase its capacity.
Okay, so I'd like to know that for sure, because I recall it being about 3 years.
Okay.
But so I'd like to know for sure what the timing is, because one of my concerns is putting in place a change like that that doesn't buy us more than about 3 years. or even 4, or even 5 years. And then we're back here having to move kids again because of the exponential growth that's going on in that particular area. That's one thing that troubles me, because in the interest of longer term solutions, as much as we can, that's what I'm looking for and thinking about. One of the parking lot ideas, I'm gonna just throw it out there, was my idea for the Ridge Point feeder pattern, and that was splitting the schedule. I haven't talked to our academic curriculum people about that yet, but one of the things that got me thinking about that is that we're talking about programming and being able to do some innovative things in education and being able to push towards the future of education with virtual classrooms or online learning or all of these things that are the future of education. And I feel like this is something we should be thinking about, because it might provide a solution on 2 fronts. One, we don't have to move kids, which we heard a lot of no rezoning. And Scott and I talked about how long that would be, and we went out 10, 12, 13 years of not having to rezone kids. And then the second thing it perhaps provides is that programming piece that we're looking for. How can we try some new and innovative things? And maybe this is a pilot type thing. So that's just something I'm thinking about, that maybe we can prevent having to move kids if kids don't want to have to move. So that's one thing I wanted to throw out there. I want to know, and I don't know that we have this answer, Scott, but if we have a dedicated GT Academy, how much will that really relieve the other middle schools? I haven't heard any numbers on that. I would like for you guys to get that data and consider that, because we talked about having the early college high school, but as Scott pointed out, that's really not going to relieve the Ridge Point problem in that area. So how much would a standalone GT Academy relieve the middle schools? Not that I think it's a bad idea. I think we've got some GT things we're trying to work out right now as in the district, and I have a daughter that's gifted, and I know how important it is for that to be a cohort. So, but I'm just curious of how much that will really relieve middle schools. I also want to throw out there that a few years ago, I don't know how many of you were in this room a few years ago, and I was on the first facilities planning committee, and we talked about the issue of the academy programs impacting top 10% at those schools and GPAs at those schools. I would like for you guys to talk about that and consider that when you're talking about consolidating or not consolidating. That was an issue that came up, is that when we put a program in a school, the zoned kids are impacted. Their GPAs are impacted. And so I think that that's something that needs to be considered when we talk about consolidating or not consolidating. The other thing, and Ms. Heller and I were talking how the literacy comment, Scott, that you read, I think it was in the Marshall or the Willow Ridge feeder pattern, there was a comment about literacy programming, and we just discussed that and passed a new literacy program, that we're going to be doing tonight if it passes. And we talked about dedicating an elementary school for that versus having the program in several schools. And I really, when you guys are mulling some of these things over, I think, literacy is one of those things that is an issue in some of our schools, particularly our schools that have populations that struggle. And I think when we're talking about, I'm kind of with everybody up here, nobody likes to close a school. And I don't think anybody up here wants to do that. But how can we utilize the buildings we have for maybe some of those programs that are so important? And I'll say at the outset, I'm not for segregating our students with disabilities. Anybody who knows me knows I have a kid with disabilities. I fight for inclusion, so just full disclosure there. That's not one of those things, but our literacy type programs we've talked about and things like that, I'd like for that to be considered. And then finally, I would support what Ms. Helliger had to say. I opened one of the Title I campuses, elementary schools, as PTO president and served there, was very honored to serve there for 3 years. And so I know firsthand about, kids who struggle, and you can have the best principal in the world, you can have the best teachers in the world, and kids are gonna struggle because kids have things that they're dealing with outside of school, and those kids are gonna struggle. So all 3 of my kids went to that school, and I have a gifted kid who went to that school, and she did great because there were great teachers and a great principal. And those kids still struggle, and it's still, if you would go out and look at the ratings, you would see it rated as a, quote, D school. That's how it would be rated. And the amount of money and resources and time we poured in for those children, and they did grow, they did improve, they did progress. But no matter what, they were dealing with things outside of that building that are very difficult for the education system, needs that the education system simply can't meet. And we're working on some things in Fort Bend. Since we have an audience, I want you guys to know that we're working on needs assessments and bringing in collaborative communities to support our kids at home and to help provide them a better opportunity to learn when they come to school. But I just want us to be mindful that when we talk about schools, we're talking about kids, and a lot of kids who struggle, and it doesn't mean that it's not a good school, because we have a lot of teachers who pour their heart and souls into schools that have student populations who struggle. So I just want to say that because I have firsthand experience with it, and it hurts me a little bit when we talk about kids like that. So these are very difficult decisions. We are about to go into closed session, and I'm sure some of the board members will make themselves available. And we appreciate, again, all of you being here this evening, and we really do take this job seriously, and we're going to work really hard to make the best decisions we can for all the kids. That being said, we are now going to convene in closed session under the Texas Open Meetings Act, Government Code, Chapter 551, and those sections listed in the agenda, and for purpose of private consultation with the board's attorney on any or all subjects or matters authorized by law. We are now convening in closed session. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.